Hey everyone, welcome back to Beekeeping with Natalie, or welcome to if you are new. Today's video is going to be talking about taking care of your wax over the wintertime. And it's drawn comb is like, everybody always talks about it, it's like gold, and you want to make sure that you keep it nice and safe, and that way it doesn't get wax moths in it. That is like probably one of our biggest problems for sure. It happens really easily just whenever you have some boxes out there that don't have bees in it, so nobody's taking care of it. It'll happen really quick, especially like a lot of our dead outs. That's what happens to them. So we try to keep really good care of our supers over winter because that's when we usually will get them. So let's talk about that today. Now we're in a little bit of a different spot here. This is our honey house, and it's still, there's some stuff that needs to be done to it, but for now it's an enclosed room that works for storing stuff, and this is where we extracted all of our honey. We are done with all the honey. I don't know if I've mentioned that yet, but we've been done with that for a little while now. So the next step is to take care of the supers. So what we usually do, once we've extracted everything, put 9 frames into our supers, what we'll do is we'll just set it outside. It can be next to the bees or whatever it is, and usually they'll go to it pretty quick because we're normally in a dearth around that time of the year, and they'll just clean it out. So they'll just kind of take any of that little honey that's still on those frames that the extractor can't quite get, and they'll just kind of clean it off, dry it out. That way it's ready to go and it can be stored. So we always make sure we do that before we're ready to actually stack them. And so this is a frame that we've had, this is probably its 2nd or 3rd year, and this just kind of shows what it looks like. It's gotten darker, which is just normal, but you can tell that there's no damage, there's nothing like, no wax moths or anything in it. It looks really nice, and this is what we want to have to do with or try to do with most of our boxes. That way, next year when our honey flow starts, maybe all of a sudden or whatever it is, we can put these on the hives, and all they have to do is maybe clean it up a little bit and then fill it with honey. So it's a lot easier for them to start with drawn comb than just from scratch on just a foundation frame. Now, if we don't take care of them, this is what can happen. I'm not ashamed to show it because I know everybody has this somewhere in their bee yard or wherever, but this is what wax moths will typically look like. I'm bad about figuring the difference between all the different moths and everything like that, but I believe this is usually what it looks like. So it almost looks like a spider web, and it's just just gets really bad. This side looks okay. They'll also start to kind of ruin the wood too, and they'll I don't know exactly the right terms for everything, but they'll start to ruin just everything on the frame, and you can see they've torn up this wax here and everything. So we don't want this to happen, and if we don't take care of our boxes, this is what's going to happen to pretty much all of them. So we don't want that. I think there's probably a couple of supers that look like this just from last year or this year that just didn't end up getting taken care of. So what we use is Paramoss. So I'll talk about that, but I had a video on this, I think it was 2 years ago or something like that, and we just talked about it. Then we were actually using it in an old camper that we just weren't using anymore. That's something you can store your supers in, or whatever it is, shipping containers are really good for that. We'll probably be looking into that at some point, but just any building that's kind of enclosed, you can store them in the freezer, but nobody has a freezer big enough for all of those supers. So that's one thing, especially if it has honey in it still that you want to keep for the next year or whatever, storing them in the freezer is good. But what we do is once all of these are cleaned out by the bees, we'll basically just start to stack them. And you want to just stack them to where these ones we'll restack them and put them maybe somewhere else, but there's little holes right here, so we want to make sure that it's solid and they're just flat together. And if there's any little holes, what we'll do, you can see, right, any of these, especially this box right here, it's still got another couple of years in it for the bees, especially because they can take care of a box that has a little bit of a hole in it. But with that small hole, stuff can get in there, so we'll just take some tape, usually, and just basically tape it up like this, and then just leave it like that over winter, and that just kind of helps with the little things. We won't do that to all of the spaces, right here, we're not going to worry about it, but any big holes like that, we'll usually go ahead and tape it up just to be safe. And we've been doing this same method for a while now, and it's worked really well. Every year the boxes are always ready to go right when we need them. Now we use some type of lid on top of them just to keep them nice and sealed, and with these lids right like this. They have their bucket lids. You can use like telescoping lids or whatever. But usually we'll put something to plug it here. This is just a mason jar lid. You can also use tape for that and just cover it up that way. We have done that just to save the actual mason jar lids for the hives. And then you can just use tape for it here. But you can use whatever, just something that goes on top to cover it pretty much. And then for below, on the bottom, before you stack all of them, you can do queen excluders because mice can get into the tiniest little spots. So usually we'll use queen excluders for just kind of anything with supers, and we always put it on the bottom just to help with mice because they can't get through those queen excluders. So we usually put that on the bottom there, and then just make sure that they're all nice and sealed and not kind of crooked like this. Just make sure that they're all put together. And then I'm going to show you this paramoth here. So this is what we use pretty much every year. And I believe, if I'm right, we do about 1 scoop for every 10 supers. So most of the time, there's a lot stacked right here, but I think a lot of times we'll stack them like 10 high, maybe a little bit more, and that's usually going to be 1. I feel like we used to do 2, but I'm not sure. I think we need to figure that out before we do it again this year, but I'm still going to go ahead and show you what that looks like here. One thing about paramoth, and really any kind of treatment, is they always smell really bad, and especially if you have it in like closed-in building like this, because then the whole thing's going to smell like that. I actually don't mind the smell of paramoth. I know it can give a headache after a while, but anyways, so I just use a paper plate, and you can actually, once you use these like the first year, if you save them and just stack them and put them aside, you can use these a bunch of times. So I mean, that's not like you don't have to save them, but you're saving a little bit of money. But usually they don't get torn or anything. They just work really well. So just place it right there. You can use paper towels or whatever. And then this is a, what is this? This is a 1/8 cup, I believe. I don't know if this came with it or not, but you really just dump it onto the paper plate. And then there's definitely instructions on the side here. My mom usually does this, actually. So it does say gloves and everything, but we don't do that. So, no, but I would recommend it. So then the paper plate just goes on top just like that. And then your lid. Now, the thing about these lids is they have a little bit of space in between here, so it's not going to touch this paper plate. I think if you have a telescoping lid with like an inner cover on it, there's usually a little bit of space in between there, so you shouldn't have to worry about like a feeder shim or anything on top. So then these just go right on top of it, and then it's sealed. Of course, we would have these more straight. Sealed, ready to go. Everything will pretty much just be like that throughout the whole winter time. And then the other thing that I have seen people talk about is putting the paramoth down below. So you put it like below all the supers. Now I don't know fully, I'm not going to say like 100%, but I don't know if that's really doing much just because your paramoth's not going to go up. It's going to go down, and that's why it's also important to make sure that the bottom is sealed. So it's flush to the ground. There's nothing like no cart under it or whatever it is. Just it's flat to the ground. That way the paramoth isn't going straight out the bottom and then into the room. It's going to stay in between all of these boxes here. So just pretty much the only thing about paramoth that you want to know is everything is sealed, flat, and there's no room for it to escape. There's going to be small little spots, of course, but just not like really big holes that it can get through. And then just thinking about the mice, of course, and just make sure that they can't get in through any spots. But that's really about it. So the whole point of this is just to make sure that our wax comes out looking like this at the end of the year, and it's ready to go for next year. It's really common to get wax moths, so if you do, it's no big deal. Everybody gets it. I don't know exactly. A lot of times, really, if you do end up getting wax moths like this here, you can go ahead and just take a hive tool and scrape the whole thing. If it's really bad and they've like destroyed everything, I'll just go ahead and scrape it and not worry about it. But if this is on like a brood frame or anything like that, I'm not okay with putting like really bad, like a whole frame of just like wax moths in there. But if it's not horrible, like this is probably a little much, but I could take a little bit of this off and then stick it in a hive. And if they're nice and strong and they've got a lot of bees in there. They can clean it up in just a couple of days and it'll be perfectly fine and you can continue to use it. But there's some frames that just don't make it, and those will end up just getting scraped and then they'll just restart on those. We'll usually re-wax it and everything, but I think that's kind of it. So it's a boring video, but it's also what we're doing this time of year and it's also important, so I figured we would talk about it. You can get the Paramoth, I think, on just Amazon. I don't know if there's any companies that really like sell it. I think there's some places that do, but I just know for a fact that you can get it off of Amazon. I think that's where we usually get it anyway. But I think that's pretty much it. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. And thanks for watching today's video. Follow along more bee adventures and be here next time on Beekeeping with Natalie.